Last week, Emily Navarro was sentenced, and David was cuffed in front of everyone. My brother's blind defense of the woman who stole and assaulted me destroyed him. She pawned my grandmother's earrings and cracked a glass on my head. David forged texts to protect her. I used my inheritance to escape. They lost their freedom. I finally gained mine. 3 months ago, I hosted a family dinner. Emily smiled, sipping wine, while sneaking into my bedroom. I caught her reflection in the mirror but said nothing. Later, I noticed the heirloom earrings were gone. They were my great-grandmother's and meant everything. My brother, David, brushed it off, said I was forgetful. I believed him. That trust would cost me. My mother whispered, "Family comes first," while Emily's smirk haunted me. 2 days after the dinner, Emily posted a selfie flaunting pearl earrings, my pearls. I zoomed in, sickened. David swore they were replicas he bought her. I searched the house. My jewelry box was rifled through. Only the heirloom was missing. Emily called me paranoid, her voice syrupy with fake concern. I felt crazy, but deep down I knew. David's silence confirmed it. He chose her lie over my truth. That broke something inside me. I confronted Emily in the kitchen, alone. She laughed and called me dramatic. When I threatened to go to the police, she dared me. "David will never believe you," she sneered. My hands shook. That night, David texted me, warning to drop it or risk splitting the family. My heart dropped. I realized this wasn't just theft, it was war. Emily had poisoned his loyalty. I wasn't ready to lose my brother, but I wouldn't back down. I checked pawn shops in town and found a record pearl earrings sold by E. Navarro 2 days after the dinner. The clerk remembered her. I printed everything and showed David. He glanced, then tore the paper in half. "She needed the money," he muttered. I stared at him, stunned. My proof didn't matter. His loyalty to her eclipsed our blood. I walked away shaking, my trust shredded. I knew then he wasn't on my side. I turned to my mother, hoping for support. She clutched her pearls, eyes heavy with sadness. "Let it go, Riley. Families survive worse," she whispered. I begged her to look at the pawn receipt, but she refused. "He loves her," she said, as if that justified betrayal. I walked out, my heels echoing on hardwood. I felt abandoned by blood, by reason. Emily had twisted everyone. I wasn't just fighting them, I was fighting legacy and silence. One night, Tara, my cousin, called. "David's trying to fabricate texts from you," she whispered. My stomach clenched. She forwarded screenshots, messages I never sent, claiming I'd given the earrings to Emily. I froze. David was trying to frame me. The betrayal cut deeper than I imagined. I saved everything. That night, I cried alone, clutching my grandmother's empty jewelry box. I had to act. No one else would protect me. Family loyalty was weaponized now. In court, I stood tall, heart hammering. I presented the pawn receipt and surveillance footage from the shop. Emily smirked, but her eyes twitched. David sat stone-faced. The judge asked for the fabricated texts. I had a forensic expert confirm their manipulation. Emily's grin cracked. My lawyer's voice cut like steel. The courtroom held its breath. My proof silenced the lies. David looked down, ashamed. For the first time, truth weighed more than loyalty. Emily snapped on the stand. Under pressure, she admitted pawning the earrings, but claimed I gave them to her. I interrupted, pulling out an old photo of me wearing them at graduation. "They weren't yours to sell," I said. Gasps rippled. The judge asked David to explain the fake messages. He stuttered. My cousin Tara stood and testified. I watched David shrink. Truth was burning through their lies. My voice didn't shake. I had nothing to hide. The prosecution presented phone records. David had contacted a friend in it, asking how to fake screenshots. The jury stirred. My parents sat behind me, stunned. My mother clutched my father's hand, her face pale. Emily glared, unraveling. When David was called to testify, he hesitated, then pleaded the fifth. The room froze. His silence was confession enough. I felt both vindicated and hollow. Justice was near, but so was the death of our family. When the verdict came, I didn't exhale. Emily was found guilty of theft and assault. David faced charges of evidence tampering. My parents didn't look at me. Emily cried as they led her away, screaming David's name. He didn't move. My chest tightened. I had won, but not without cost. The gavel dropped. My tears stayed in. I stood, nodded to my lawyer, and walked out. Justice had spoken. My family hadn't. That silence hurt most. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I held up the photo of my grandmother's earrings. "These were stolen," I said. But the betrayal cut deeper. The cameras flashed. Emily's lawyer stormed past. Livid, David was escorted out in cuffs. I didn't flinch. My mother stood nearby, eyes wet. "Riley," she began. But I turned away. Words wouldn't fix this. I had fought for truth, not pity. The world knew now. That was enough for today, the day after the verdict. My lawyer called with news: a hidden account under David's name, fed monthly from my trust fund. I froze. My parents had rerouted the inheritance after our grandmother passed, to manage it better. David had used it for trips, dinners, gifts for Emily. My chest burned. This wasn't just theft, it was betrayal sanctioned by blood. I confronted my parents. They looked away, ashamed. The rot went deeper than Emily. I requested bank records and my father reluctantly handed them over. Every month, for 5 years, my inheritance funded Emily's lifestyle. A weekend spa in Aspen, a necklace gifted to her by David, all paid from my trust. I gripped the papers, fury rising. "They never told me. We didn't think you were ready," my father muttered. I laughed bitterly. Ready for what? Being robbed by my own blood. I packed my bags that night. Before leaving, I opened my grandmother's journal. Tucked behind a photo frame, her final entry mentioned me by name. Riley sees truth clearer than any of them. My throat tightened. She'd left the earrings and inheritance to me for a reason. Her handwriting, delicate but firm, reminded me who I was. I took the journal, closed my childhood door, and didn't look back. I wasn't just reclaiming assets, I was reclaiming myself. Truth deserved a new home. I booked a one-way flight to the Cayman Islands. I used the last of what remained in the trust and touch funds finally returned by court order. My lawyer arranged everything. Emily's conviction had forced restitution. David's assets were frozen. I boarded that plane without telling anyone. As it lifted, so did the weight on my chest. I wasn't running, I was resetting. My past wasn't an anchor anymore, it was evidence. Filed and closed, the villa overlooked turquoise water. On the terrace, I unpacked one thing, the photo of me and my grandmother, both wearing those earrings. I didn't need them back, I needed what they symbolized: trust, legacy, strength. I lit a candle for her. The sea breeze carried away old names: David, Emily, even mom and dad. I wasn't erasing them, I was prioritizing me. That night, I slept without nightmares. For the first time in months, I felt safe. Weeks later, I received a letter, David's handwriting, shaky and stained. He wrote from jail, apologizing. I see it now, he said. She used me, I failed you. I read it twice, then burned it. Apologies don't rebuild what betrayal destroys. I didn't need his guilt. I needed peace. And in that moment, watching ash rise, I knew I'd outgrown his orbit. I wasn't his sister anymore, not the version he remembered. I had risen, alone but whole. One morning, a reporter reached out. She wanted my story, not just the court drama, but the personal journey. I hesitated, but then I remembered how many women live in silence after betrayal. I agreed. We spoke for hours as she listened. When the article went live, messages poured in. I thought I was alone. Thank you, I hadn't planned to inspire anyone. But maybe healing wasn't just for me. Maybe truth, once shared, becomes light. The online support group invited me to speak. I was nervous, but I joined via video. Women from across the country shared stories of gaslighting, stolen legacies, emotional warfare. I told them about Emily, David, the earrings, about burning the letter, about the photo. You're not crazy, you're not alone. I said, their faces lit up. In helping them, I helped myself. I'd found something better than revenge. I'd found resonance, and that couldn't be stolen. I started writing, not just for therapy but for clarity. A blog, then a column. Daughter of Silence, I called it. Each post peeled back another layer of betrayal, and with each one I felt lighter. Strangers reached out. Survivors, daughters, sisters. Their words wrapped around me like armor. I wasn't invisible anymore. David and Emily had taken my silence, I'd turned it into a megaphone. Pain didn't define me, my voice did, and I was finally using it. A package arrived, no return address. Inside, the pearl earrings, the real ones, a note: they belong with you. No name, no apology, just truth mailed back. I held them in my palm, breath shallow. Had David sent them? Father? I'd never know, but it didn't matter. I wasn't defined by who returned them, I was defined by surviving their theft. I placed them in my safe, not as treasure, but as testimony. A foundation reached out. They wanted to fund my writing as part of a women's empowerment program. I was stunned. My story, once whispered, now broadcast, was a beacon. I signed the contract. Daughter of Silence would go national. I toasted with local expats, salt on my lips from the sea breeze. I wasn't healing in secret anymore. I was loud, visible, and damn proud. Cain had forged purpose. I hadn't escaped, I'd evolved. There was no going back. At a bookstore signing, a woman placed a photo on the table, her mother with a bruised eye. She read your article and left him, she whispered. My breath caught. This wasn't just about Emily and David anymore. It was about every woman silenced by loyalty, fear, shame. I hugged her. No words, just truth between us. I'd walked through fire so others didn't have to burn. My story wasn't just mine. It was a spark. My mother finally called, her voice shook. I didn't protect you. I see it now. I stayed silent. I hope you find peace, she added. Before hanging up, I didn't cry, I felt resolved. Her words weren't an apology, they were admission. That was enough. I didn't need her redemption. I had my own. The distance between us was permanent. But so was my clarity. Some wounds don't close, but they stop bleeding. And that's something. One rainy afternoon, I visited the local orphanage. The director had read my blog and invited me to speak. I told my story to girls who's lost everything. One asked, how do you trust again? I knelt, held her hand. Start with yourself, I said. Their eyes so wide, so wounded, watched me like I held secrets. I didn't, I just held scars. But I showed them. Not to scare but to show healing is real, even without apologies. In the mirror, I saw someone I hadn't recognized for years, me. Not the bruised sister, not the betrayed daughter. Just Riley, whole, steady. I wrapped the pearl earrings in silk and locked them away again. They were proof of what I'd endured, not what I needed to display. My victory wasn't in revenge, it was in the quiet mornings, the steady breaths, the choice to smile again. I didn't need validation. I'd already validated myself. I revisited the courthouse website and saw Emily's parole denied. David's appeal failed. Justice was holding. But I didn't feel triumphant, I felt steady. Their names no longer triggered nausea or rage, just silence. I closed the browser and walked outside. The ocean greeted me. I breathed in salt, sun, and sovereignty. Closure didn't arrive in verdicts. It arrived when I stopped seeking apologies from broken people. My life was no longer a reaction. It was mine. On the island, I woke to peace instead of panic. I lit incense each morning, the scent of sandalwood grounding me. The photo of my grandmother rested beside my journal, my new heirloom. I wrote, not to remember pain, But to track growth, my heart no longer raced when my phone rang. I had boundaries now, and I honored them. Healing wasn't linear, it was layered. Each choice I made reaffirmed my worth. I wasn't who they broke, I was who I rebuilt. I started mentoring girls online, those navigating betrayal. Family pressure, stolen voices. We didn't talk about forgiveness, we talked about fortitude, about choosing self-respect over forced loyalty. I watched them bloom, sending poems, sketches, dreams once buried. They called me Big Sister, and I cried the first time I heard it. I wasn't just healing, I was helping others escape the silence I once suffocated in. Justice had started in court, but real justice lived in every girl I helped stand up. David remained in prison. Emily's name became tabloid ash. My parents stopped reaching out. Their silence was their consequence. I didn't chase closure anymore, I created it. The Cayman Villa became more than escape, it was my sanctuary. I redecorated with bright art, soft linens, and a single shelf of books all written by women who rose from ruin. My story now sat among them. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a symbol of rising, uninvited but unstoppable. Now I teach writing workshops for survivors. We start not with pain, but with power. Each woman pens her truth, raw, messy, unapologetic. We read aloud under banyan trees. Our voice is loud enough to scare ghosts. One student said, "Your earrings, they started this." I smiled, they revealed it. The theft was the spark, not the story. The story was in the reclaiming, in the rewriting, and in the women who now speak without shaking. That's legacy, that's mine.